Revelation 13. Well, a book that my children used to love me reading to them when they were little. It's a book called A is for Ah! And it's all about a teacher that turns into a monster so that she could teach the children a lesson about how to be kind. And I'm glad I kept it because now my grandchildren love it. It's quite a scary story, but they all love the moment when the teacher turns into a monster. They're frightened, but they know the ending. Once the children have learned their lesson, the monster turns back into the teacher and it all turns out well in the end. Well, that's what I thought of when I turned to my Bible to read Revelation 13, the tale of the dragon and the two monsters. 3 lots of terror to make sure that we really do feel the fear. But before we get to the dragon and the 2 monsters, a little bit of a recap. Revelation is John's message to us from the heavenly realms. He's given a series of messages in vivid pictures and numbers, all of which mean something and represent something. So it can be quite a puzzle to work it out, but as the title of the book suggests, it's quite a revelation when you get to understand some of the meaning. Well, 1 John is asked to write 7 letters of warning to the 7 churches. Then there are 3 lots of 7 judgments, the 7 seals, the 7 trumpets, and finally the 7 bowls, which we haven't quite got to yet. Why 7 of everything? Well, as we know, 7 is the number of perfection, of completion. How many days are there in a week? How often did the farmers have to leave a field fallow, etc., etc.? So, we've just had the 7th trumpet. Then enter the woman and the dragon that we heard about from Chris last week. The woman represents the believing community. The dragon represents the enemies of God and Israel. To the woman a son is born, and he represents the Messiah. And then there is heavenly warfare, and the archangel Michael throws the dragon, Satan, from heaven to earth, and the dragon pursues the woman, but she is helped by the earth. And the dragon gets really cross and makes war against the rest of the woman's offspring. That's other believers. And then the dragon stands on the shore of the sea. And here we are in the story, the next instalment of monster horror. Monster 1, a beast comes out of the sea. Now, the appearance of this monster is straight from Daniel 7, where Daniel describes 4 monsters or beasts, a leopard, a bear, a lion, and a 4th beast. But these are all now rolled into one, and they represent 4 kingdoms, the 4th of which becomes a great and brutal world empire. The 7 heads represent the hills on which the woman sits. The 10 horns with the 10 crowns, they represent the 10 kings who have not yet received a kingdom. And the blasphemous name that is on them represents the titles of deity that were assigned to the Roman emperors. This monster is given authority and power over all, and all those who are not in the book of life will worship him. All rather frightening. But we have an encouraging verse to finish this section with, an antidote to the monster. This is how we are to face it. This calls for patient endurance and faithfulness on the part of the saints, is what John says. In other words, however scary life may seem, and it is at the moment in ways that we would never have imagined, keep your faith, persevere, be patient, don't veer off track. Then comes monster 2. A beast comes out of the earth. Among other things, this beast symbolises a false prophet. This is evident from his appearance. The 2 horns are like a little lamb, John says. So this monster is attempting to appear gentle and harmless, and yet it spoke like a dragon. Remember Jesus' teaching in Matthew 7, beware of wolves in sheep's clothing. Yes, this beast is out to deceive. It is trying to look like something it isn't. It wants to fool us. And it's not just its appearance that shows it's trying to look like something it isn't. Along with the beast from the sea and the dragon, this beast completes the trinity of evil. But we know the truth, don't we? The trinity of God, the Father, Son, and Spirit. In verse 13, we read that it performs miraculous signs. Remember Jesus teaching in Matthew 24, beware of false prophets, they may even deceive believers. And this monster sets up an image for people to worship. And then it forces everyone to have a mark on their right hand or their forehead. They are all branded like slaves. They are owned. Remember that the followers of Christ would have had the sign of the cross made on them when they became a Christian. And as only people with the sign could buy or sell, the faith of believers was in danger of being compromised. As how else were they going to make a living or eat if they're unable to buy or sell? Then we finish with the monster's name. It is man's number, we are told, which is 666. Apparently, numbers were used as code, and decoded it translate as Nero Caesar, the leader of the empire. But we also know that 777 is the number of perfection, of completion. So each of the digits of the monster falls short of the perfect number 7. And that is the end of chapter 13. If we went on to 14, we get to the good bit, the Lamb being worshipped by thousands who have his name written on their foreheads. There is the sound of heaven, roaring, rushing water, peals of thunder, harpists, and they are singing a new song. But that's for next week, folks. Sorry, I've got to get back to chapter 13. How can we make sense of the two monsters and the message that John brings to believers? Well, the first monster is all about great power, about getting people to worship it. The second monster is all about deception. It is a false prophet. And the message to believers is an encouragement to keep the faith in the midst of worldly power, temptations to worship other things, to stand strong when the deceiver tries to veer us off course. So what are our monsters? Do we sometimes find ourselves seeking after status and power, that next promotion maybe? Do we catch ourselves idolizing things? Oh, I'd love a new phone, car, house, whatever, like so-and-so down the road. Do we get easily deceived by what the world says that we want or need? That it makes us veer off course, makes us take our eyes off Jesus. Well, we face choices every day, don't we? We can go this way or that. Do we choose the way of Jesus or the way of the world? It is so easy to go along with what everyone else is doing. When my children were teenagers, a phrase they got tired of hearing from me when they asked if they could have the next in thing, or were negotiating what time they could come home from a night out or where they went for a night out, was this. I used to say, just because everyone else is doing it doesn't make it right. Well, one of my biggest monsters is busyness. John Ortberg said this, for many of us, the great danger is not that we will renounce our faith. It is that we will become so distracted and rushed and preoccupied that we will settle for a mediocre version of it. We will just skim our lives instead of actually living them. The pandemic we are living in brings very real dangers to us and the world right now. But there is also a global pandemic of busyness, anxiety, a lack of depth to life. Dallas Willard said that hurry is the great enemy of spiritual life today. Why is that? Well, when I hurry, I become self-centered. I don't notice other people or treat them with kindness as I should. I don't love as I should. John Mark Comer wrote that hurry and love are incompatible, and God is love. If I'm in a hurry, I don't have time to just be with God, to love him, to love others, to listen to him, to worship him. I think the monsters might quite like busyness. My children's book about the teacher that turns into a monster is a pretty harmless story, and it all turns out well in the end. But John's message about these two monsters is far more alarming. It is a warning that we can easily veer off course in our faith. We all have monsters that tempt us away, that deceive us, that have power over us. But John also gives us the answer, the perfect antidote. In the middle of all the monster horror, John has inserted a pearl of truth for us to keep our focus on. The saints, that's us folks, that's you and me, are required to show great faithfulness and patient endurance. While we've been in lockdown, I've had an experience of what less hurry looks like. I've spent more time with Jesus, more time in quiet, more time reflecting. Faithfulness and patience have been strengthened in me. As we begin to come out of lockdown, my challenge will be to continue stepping forward into a deeper relationship with God rather than stepping back into the world of monsters, which is busyness for me. And lockdown has given most of us a chance to pause and reflect. I wonder what your monsters are, what those things are that distract you from a deeper relationship with God. Well, now is a good time to put plans into place that will help us defeat our monsters as we prepare to come out of lockdown. Until Jesus comes again, we remain in a spiritual battle, but John encourages us to exercise faithfulness and patient endurance until that time comes. So we're going to listen to a song now, and I hope that will give us an opportunity just to reflect and ponder on what we've been thinking about as we worship